In the frozen forests of northern Europe during the winter of 1939, a quiet and deadly figure began to appear along the front lines where Soviet and Finnish forces clashed in one of the harshest environments of the Second World War. Temperatures dropped far below freezing, snow covered the ground in thick layers, and visibility was often limited by blizzards and dense forest terrain. In these brutal conditions, a single soldier began to build a reputation that would spread fear among enemy troops and eventually become one of the most legendary stories of the war. His name was Simo Häyhä, a Finnish sniper whose skill, patience and precision would make him one of the most effective snipers in military history. When the conflict known as the Winter War began between Finland and the Soviet Union, the Finnish army faced overwhelming odds. Soviet forces possessed far greater numbers of soldiers, tanks and artillery, while Finland relied on smaller units that used knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics to resist the invasion. The forests and snow-covered landscapes became a natural advantage for Finnish soldiers who were familiar with the environment and could move quietly through the terrain. Simo Häyhä was one of these soldiers, and before the war he had been a farmer and a hunter. His experience hunting in the forests of Finland had already given him exceptional marksmanship and patience, skills that would prove critical during the war. Unlike many snipers who used telescopic sights, Häyhä preferred to use a standard rifle with iron sights. This decision had several advantages in the extreme cold conditions of the Winter War. Telescopic sights could reflect light and reveal the position of a sniper while also being more difficult to use in freezing temperatures where lenses could fog or freeze. Iron sights allowed Häyhä to maintain a lower profile and aim more quickly without the risk of glare. He also developed techniques to conceal himself in the snow, often packing snow around his position to reduce the visibility of his movements and to stabilize his rifle. In some cases he even placed snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from creating visible vapor in the freezing air. These small details made him incredibly difficult to detect even when he was positioned close to enemy lines. As the war continued, Häyhä began engaging Soviet soldiers with remarkable accuracy. Moving quietly through the forests, he would select positions that provided clear lines of sight while remaining hidden from view. Once in position, he could wait for long periods of time without moving, carefully observing enemy activity and choosing the perfect moment to fire. His patience and discipline allowed him to take precise shots that often eliminated targets before they even realized they were being watched. Soviet soldiers soon began noticing that men were being picked off seemingly at random without any clear indication of where the shots were coming from. This created a sense of fear and confusion among troops operating in areas where Häyhä was active. His ability to remain hidden and strike with precision made him extremely difficult to counter using conventional tactics. Finnish units often used snipers like Häyhä as part of their defensive strategy to slow down advancing Soviet forces. By targeting officers and key personnel, snipers could disrupt command structures and reduce the effectiveness of larger enemy units. Häyhä excelled in this role and quickly became one of the most successful snipers on the battlefield. Over time, reports of his effectiveness began spreading among Soviet troops, who started referring to him as the White Death. The name reflected both his ability to blend into the snowy environment and the deadly accuracy of his shots. Soviet commanders attempted to locate and eliminate the sniper using various methods, including counter-sniper teams and artillery bombardments aimed at suspected positions. However, Häyhä's skill at choosing concealed positions allowed him to survive these attempts and continue operating effectively. The extreme conditions of the Winter War made his achievements even more remarkable. Temperatures sometimes dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, yet Häyhä continued operating in these conditions for long periods of time. His clothing, equipment and knowledge of survival in the cold allowed him to endure where many others struggled. The combination of environmental advantage and individual skill made him a unique and highly effective soldier in a conflict defined by harsh conditions and uneven forces. As his reputation grew, so did the efforts to stop him. Soviet units increased their focus on identifying sniper positions, and some reports suggest that artillery was used specifically in attempts to eliminate him. Despite these efforts, Häyhä continued operating across multiple engagements, maintaining his effectiveness and contributing significantly to the Finnish defensive effort. His actions demonstrated how a single skilled individual could influence a much larger battlefield through precision and patience. Over the course of the war, his number of confirmed kills continued to rise, making him one of the most successful snipers in history. Each engagement added to his growing legend among both Finnish and Soviet forces. For Finnish soldiers, he became a symbol of resistance and skill, while for Soviet troops he represented a hidden threat that could appear at any moment. The forests of Finland had become the perfect environment for a sniper like Häyhä, where terrain, weather and experience combined to create one of the most effective marksmen the world had ever seen. As the Winter War continued, the legend of Simo Häyhä grew with each passing day as reports of his accuracy and effectiveness spread across both sides of the front line. Soviet units operating in forested areas became increasingly cautious, knowing that at any moment a hidden sniper could be watching their movements. Soldiers moved more slowly, avoided open spaces and attempted to use cover whenever possible, yet even these precautions often proved insufficient against a sniper who understood the terrain so well. Häyhä continued using the same disciplined approach that had made him successful from the beginning. He carefully selected positions that allowed him to observe enemy activity while remaining completely concealed, and once in place he would wait for the right moment to strike. His patience allowed him to exploit even the smallest mistakes made by enemy soldiers. A brief exposure while moving between cover or a moment of hesitation could be enough for him to take a precise shot. Over time, his confirmed number of kills continued to increase, reaching levels that were almost unimaginable for a single soldier. This growing number made him a priority target for Soviet commanders, who recognized the impact he was having on their operations. Counter-sniper teams were deployed with the specific mission of locating and eliminating him. These teams often consisted of skilled marksmen trained to detect the subtle signs of a sniper's presence, such as disturbed snow or unusual patterns in the environment. However, Häyhä's experience as a hunter and his deep understanding of camouflage allowed him to avoid detection even by trained observers. He blended into the snowy landscape so effectively that even when enemy soldiers searched nearby areas, they often failed to find any trace of him. In addition to counter-sniper teams, Soviet forces also used indirect methods in an attempt to eliminate him. Artillery units were sometimes directed to fire on suspected sniper positions in hopes of destroying him through bombardment. These attacks created dangerous conditions not only for Häyhä but also for other Finnish soldiers operating in the area. Despite these efforts, he continued to survive and operate effectively, maintaining his role as one of the most feared snipers on the battlefield. His success was not only due to his shooting ability but also to his discipline and consistency. He avoided unnecessary risks, relocated when necessary, and maintained a careful balance between aggression and caution. This approach allowed him to remain active for a longer period than many other snipers who might have been discovered or eliminated after repeated engagements. The harsh winter conditions continued to shape every aspect of the conflict, and Häyhä's ability to operate in extreme cold remained one of his greatest advantages. While many soldiers struggled with frozen equipment and limited visibility, he was able to adapt his methods to the environment. He used the terrain to his advantage, often positioning himself in areas where the contrast between snow and shadow helped conceal his presence. His clothing and equipment were chosen to blend seamlessly into the surroundings, reducing the chance of detection. Even the sound of his shots was difficult to locate due to the way sound traveled in the cold environment. As his reputation grew, Soviet troops began associating certain areas with the presence of the White Death, and in some cases they avoided those areas entirely or approached them with extreme caution. This psychological impact was one of the most significant effects of his actions. By creating uncertainty and fear among enemy soldiers, he was able to influence their behavior and reduce their effectiveness in combat. Finnish forces benefited from this as it slowed down Soviet advances and disrupted their operations. The presence of a highly effective sniper forced the enemy to devote additional resources to countering a single individual, which demonstrated the strategic value of skilled marksmen in warfare. However, the constant danger and exposure to combat eventually took its toll. In March 1940, near the end of the Winter War, Häyhä was seriously wounded during an engagement when an explosive bullet struck his face, causing severe injuries. The impact left him unconscious and he was evacuated from the battlefield. For many soldiers, such an injury would have marked the end of their story, but in Häyhä's case it became another part of his legend. He regained consciousness days later after the war had effectively ended and began a long recovery process. Despite the severity of his injuries, he survived and eventually returned to civilian life. By the time the war ended, his confirmed number of kills had reached an extraordinary level, making him one of the most successful snipers in military history. His actions during the Winter War became a symbol of Finnish resistance and demonstrated how skill and determination could overcome overwhelming odds. After the war, Häyhä lived a quiet life, returning to the countryside where he continued activities such as hunting that had once shaped his abilities as a marksman. He rarely sought attention or recognition for his actions and remained a humble figure despite his legendary status. Over time, his story became widely known and studied by military historians and enthusiasts who sought to understand the techniques and mindset that made him so effective. His use of iron sights, his mastery of camouflage, and his ability to operate under extreme conditions all contributed to his reputation as one of the greatest snipers in history. The legacy of Simo Häyhä continues to be remembered as an example of how a single individual can have a significant impact on a battlefield through precision, patience, and an understanding of the environment. The name White Death remains one of the most recognized in the history of warfare and serves as a reminder of the extraordinary events that took place during the Winter War. As the war came to an end and the guns along the frozen front lines finally fell silent, the story of Simo Häyhä was already becoming something far greater than a simple record of battlefield success. What he had accomplished during the Winter War stood out not only because of the number of enemy soldiers he had eliminated, but because of the conditions in which he had done it and the impact his actions had on the course of the conflict. His confirmed number of kills reached over 500, making him one of the most effective snipers ever recorded in military history. These kills were achieved in a relatively short period of time under some of the harshest environmental conditions imaginable. Temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes, deep snow that limited movement and visibility, and constant danger from enemy forces all formed the backdrop to his actions. Yet despite these challenges, he maintained a level of precision and consistency that few others could match. His ability to remain calm under pressure and to execute each shot with careful calculation was a defining aspect of his success. Even after being severely wounded near the end of the war, his survival added another layer to his legend. The injury he suffered was devastating and required a long period of recovery, but he managed to live for many years afterward, demonstrating a resilience that matched his performance on the battlefield. After recovering, he returned to a quiet life in Finland, where he avoided publicity and focused on living as he had before the war. He continued hunting and spending time in nature, which had been a central part of his life long before he became known as a sniper. Despite his achievements, he remained a humble individual who did not seek recognition or fame. Over time, however, his story spread beyond Finland and became known around the world. Military historians studied his methods to understand how he had achieved such remarkable results. His preference for iron sights rather than a telescopic scope became a topic of discussion, as it highlighted the importance of adapting equipment to environmental conditions. His use of camouflage and positioning demonstrated how knowledge of terrain could be just as important as technical skill. The discipline required to remain motionless for long periods of time while waiting for the right opportunity became an example of the patience needed for effective marksmanship. These elements combined to create a model that would influence future generations of snipers and soldiers. The psychological impact of his presence on the battlefield also became an important part of his legacy. By creating uncertainty and fear among enemy troops, he was able to influence their behavior and reduce their effectiveness even when he was not actively engaging targets. This aspect of warfare showed how a single individual could have a broader strategic effect beyond direct combat. The name White Death became a symbol of this impact, representing not only his skill but also the fear he inspired among those who faced him. As time passed, his story continued to be told in books, documentaries, and military studies, highlighting the unique circumstances of the Winter War and the role he played in it. His achievements remain unmatched in many ways and continue to be referenced when discussing the greatest snipers in history. The environment in which he operated, the techniques he used, and the results he achieved all contributed to a legacy that extends far beyond the battlefield. Today, Simo Häyhä is remembered not only as a soldier but as a symbol of precision, discipline, and resilience. His story serves as an example of how skill and determination can allow an individual to overcome overwhelming challenges and make a lasting impact. The frozen forests where he once lay hidden have long since returned to silence, but the legend of the sniper known as the White Death continues to endure as one of the most remarkable stories of the Second World War.